Can a winter sober dawn swallow the sound an axe makes when it remembers the tree it came from? Can a house trained for years to hold its breath forget to exhale at the very moment truth raises its arm? And can silence, patient as frost on a fence rail, become the one witness that neither trembles nor lies? Virginia, 1838. The fields lie ribbed and pale, the fences stitched with ice, the lane running like a cold vein toward a heart that beats behind shutters. Somewhere a rooster clears its throat, somewhere else a clock counts the soul of the room it lives in. The big house sits like an old sermon that keeps revising itself. The wind carries a rumour it does not understand. The rumour has a weight, a haft, a blade. It will be lifted. Pause here, on the sill where the light first tests the room, where every board remembers every name laid across it. Another story is about to walk in, carrying a ledger too heavy for one pair of hands. If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. Breathe once, do not speak, the floor is listening, so is the axe. Morning in this county arrives like a law. Frost signs each window with a pale, unarguable hand. Smoke rises, thin as a promise a man makes to himself in the night and dares not say aloud at the table. The big house knows its own weight and complains about it. Low wooden groans as if the walls are tired of escorting the same footsteps. The chimneys mutter their burnt prayers, and the stair-treads recite names no one is meant to hear. Down the slope the quarters make their music, the iron language of kettles, the small bell of a spoon tapped against a tin cup, the hush of breath when a mother counts the ribs of fever on a child's chest. All labour here is an alphabet of grief. Wash, wring, hang. Hoe, stoop, rise, chop, stack, carry, sew, knot, mend. The day is a length of rope, and everyone learns how to move within its fibres. The master's house stands with its shoulders squared to the lane, white-planked and moral. The porch hauls in travellers' shadows and keeps them, neat as hats on pegs. The master's voice carries through walls like smell, tobacco, command, habit. His cane, when it walks the hall, is a second heartbeat the house has learned to obey. His dog knows the door by ear. So do the children who bear the same last name that the house insists on, season after season. At dawn, the cook bank shifts the fire, blade of ash against embers, coaxing orange from black the way a memory is coaxed from a mouth that has refused for years. A kettle's mouth sings. A skillet leans into heat, fat answers with a hiss that could be rain. In the yard, an axe is seated in a stump as though it were ever asked to split. Field hands shoulder the morning like a yoke, hoes slap down to earth in a rhythm older than law. Breath turns to a white script in cold air. Words are scarce currency and must be held between the teeth until they grow interest. But silence here is not empty, it is packed with long hours and measurements. The way a boot lands, the angle of a look, the pitch of a hinge. The quarters speak across distances with glances, with the small grammar of nods and hands. Noon comes thin. The sun is a button that never quite fastens the sky to the day. The master's laugh travels, but it does not warm. He is a ledger who believes in himself. He tallies harvest, hides, hours, lives, stacks them in columns no court will ever cross through with a red line. His pipe knocks ash against the porch rail the way a judge knocks a gavel, to remind wood who wears the robe. The evening puts its hands on everything and quiets it. The barn swallows what it has been fed, bales, tools, rumours. A lantern walks the lane like a moving star. In the quarters there is water, bread, a shared stew that smuggles herbs of memory from a different coast. A grandmother ties a thread around a child's wrist for luck, the master says, is superstition, but the night knows as science. Someone hums what cannot be said, the hymn is a key made of breath. When the moon throws a soft knife across the yard, the big house relaxes its shoulders. Locks find their mouths. Hinges rest, the axe sleeps in the yard, blade away, as if the day is a story finished at last. But even as the fire closes its orange eye and pretends to be stone, the whole place keeps listening. Boards, fields, hinges, dog, wind. For what? For the thing that waited until now to begin. I learned early that silence does not mean the world is empty, it means the world is keeping score. Each day I put another number where the day demanded it. A back has its arithmetic, so do wrists' memory. The cane keeps time. It is a metronome with a handle. And if the tune is obedience, then the ledger is the songbook we cannot refuse. My name is Isaiah when I say it to myself. To them I am anything that fits in the mouth quick. Boy, you, the one with the steady hands, the one with the back that does not argue. To myself I am the man who remembers his mother sewing by moonlight when the seam her fingers followed could not be seen by anyone who did not know cloth in their blood. I am the boy who listened to water speak a tongue older than English, where the creek knelt to the A ledger can live under the skin, mine does. First line, the day my sister's laugh was called insolence. Second line, the day I watched a friend become an example. Third line, the time we were promised something smaller than dignity as a reward for overtime and were handed a sermon instead. The columns rise. The ink does not smear because it is cut into a place where rain does not reach. There is a way a master's hand lands on a table that tells you he is about to write his name on your air. There is a way he touches his cane that tells you a sentence is coming down the stairs. He likes to say that order keeps the wolves at the fence. I have learned to hear which wolves he means. I carry silence like a stone under the tongue. I have learned the weight, heavy enough to bruise, small enough to keep. Words can be confiscated, a stone cannot. When he asks those questions that are not questions, I let the quiet answer for me. Quiet is the only thing he cannot whip. It does not belong to the back. At dusk I tended the woodpile. The axe lived there, its handle as smooth as sleep from hands that took what they were told to take. I learned its hum, that soft throat sound when steel noses into grain. I learned to feel the hidden vectors of a log where it wishes to divide because a storm once instructed the tree to lean a certain way. I cut kindling like a prayer, the kind you say with breath only. The ledger turned pages without my hands. The winter he sold my brother to a road that never wrote back, I quit speaking to mirrors. The summer he corrected the young with a Sunday strap and then smiled at dinner. I learned how to remove the sound of my own teeth grinding from my sleep so it would not wake others. The autumn he said we were property, and Providence was satisfied. I understood that property preferred not to be consulted in public. I slept near the axe because the woodpile was my work. He liked the yard kept neat, his world split into usable sizes. I gave him that alignment, but every split had music in it I kept for myself. Each thud of wedge into heartwood sounded like another mark in the ledger. The night absorbed it. Night is an accountant's lamp that no one sees. I loved once, by the smokehouse. In a season the bees were drunk on clover and the calves learned their names. She braided my hair tight and said tight braids keep thoughts from falling out. She was sold to a room I never entered. My scalp remembers the pattern her fingers wrote. I keep that too, under the tongue. The ledger has a column for absence. It tallies larger than anything. If you were to ask where the plan began, I would say it did not begin. It grew like lichen on a stone, slow, fateful, shy of sunlight. The axe did not call to me, I called to it by listening. A tool is a truth with a handle. Steel does not know good or evil. It knows angle, momentum, and stop. The house had taught me all three. I learned the master's hours the way a man learns a river, by reading what the surface pretends and what the undertow confesses. Early he walked the porch with his cup, cane ticking, dog trotting a figure eight around his steps. Midday he sat in the office and worried the figures until they behaved. Evening he grew sentimental and told his pipe the version of himself that would have made him proud. Nights he slept as if the world had signed a treaty with his dreams. My planning stole nothing the house could feel missing. Silence was my knife, and I did not sharpen it where anyone could hear. I mapped hinges that did not cry, steps that did not complain, the length of time a kettle could be left before its ghost heat gave away a presence. I learned how long the moon took to move from the barn roof to the porch rail, so I might travel in shadow with a clock I did not own. I considered fire. I had seen what it wrote when a barn took a notion to go to heaven. Fire is a quill that refuses to stop once it signs its first letter. But fire is a talker, and I needed a deed that could be carried in 2 hands and laid down without ashes testimony. Poison was a thought that passed through me like a bird's shadow. It does its work in private, and the body tells on the hand that mixed rope makes a speech a neck cannot interrupt. A knife hums a high gospel, bright and quick, but an axe speaks the language of the place itself. Wood understands it. Houses recognize it. Doors decide they were always meant to be open. I would let the house translate what I meant. I began to rehearse under the day's errands. When I split around, I watched my wrists keep their counsel. The axe rose, aligned to the secret seam, and the blow fell not with anger. Anger shakes the hand, but with judgment, which is calm. I tested the quiet of the edge against a thumbnail, then set it back in the stump like a priest returns a book to its shelf between services. In the evenings I walked the yard and taught myself the width of my own shadow, how to tuck it into corners where corners had forgotten to look. I collected small things whose absence made no noise, a square of rag to quiet metal's gossip, a sliver of tallow to butter a stubborn hinge, a slat of pine to test a floorboard's temper before I promised it my weight. I watched the dog learn to love sleep after beef bone dinners. I learned which floor in the hall lied most about a footfall. The hall had 1 plank, 3rd from the door, that sang a hymn so soft you could mistake it for wind if you were arrogant enough not to fear music at night. I planted patience like winter wheat and let it root. Nights that had voices, I did not choose them. Nights that had clouds but not rain, I let them pass. The strongest silence is the one even the moon fails to see. When I listened from the quarters, I learned how the master's snore travelled in the early night, choked and fretful near morning. Between those 2 shores was a narrow soundless strait. A boat could pass then without ripple. So could a man. I thought of my brother learning a new geography with a whip as compass. I thought of the girl whose braids taught my scalp memory. I thought of my mother's knuckles bleeding on a seam that would not yield, and how she turned the thread to flame between finger and thumb to seal it. I thought of the ledger, which had begun to shine behind my eyes, the way an ember glows when ash pretends to be the whole story. Every thought was not a spur, it was a level. I kept the bubble centered. When the day came that the frost wrote fiercest on the window panes, I knew the wood would be brittle with honesty. Cold wood is a congregation that listens. The axe, too, hardens its vowels. If a sound must be made, it will be syllables that need no translator. The house would understand. And if houses can bless, it might. The household went to bed with the clean conscience of routine. A card game had been smugly finished. The master drank the last of a story he told and believed. The cane leaned by the study door with a satisfied posture. The dog, stuffed with dinner, had the soul of a stone. I gathered myself from the dark like a coat and put myself. I walked first to the woodpile, as if fidelity to work could be a cloak. I touched the axe handle and felt the history of many hands enter mine. Men who had not meant what I meant had taught me the tool I would use. The night kept my promise. No star shouted. The wind held its breath. I wrapped the rag around Steele's mouth and lifted the thing that had always belonged to gravity and asked it to belong to me instead. From yard to porch is a small journey. if you do not count the miles in a man's heart. The steps, those old judges, declined to speak when I placed each foot where years of sweeping had polished the grit quiet. The latch knew the tallow and did not gossip when turned. Hinges aquire in the day pretended to be a dead congregation. And still I did not hurry. The worst way to meet a door is to arrive at it with running in your lungs. I moved with the speed of truth, inevitable, unproud, exact. He slept under a quilt his grandmother had made, the squares a museum of shirts whose wearers were all dead and virtuous in his telling. His mouth hung open like a draw-wood had swollen around. He would have to be pried from the story that his body had learned to tell itself, that he was protector, that order wore his face, that the centuries had invited him personally to keep the porch swept and the fields submissive. The room smelled of pipe ash and a man's belief in himself. His cane lay close like a lie he could reach in the dark. The fire in the small grate had fallen to the red of old arguments. I stood and counted my ribs with my breath. I stood and listened for the plank outside the door that prayed too loudly. It did not pray. I stood and asked my right hand what it meant to lift what it had lifted 1,000 honest times, and lend it. I did not think of names. If I named anyone I loved then, I would hang the weight of the whole world on a swing meant only to carry what had to be done. I let my mind empty the way a butcher's wooden block looks blank until you tilt it to the light and see every history etched there. The axe felt not heavier, not lighter, familiar, as if the day had simply not ended and I had returned to a good tool to finish the honest work of dividing what insists on being whole when it should be fair. He stirred. Only the small correction men make in sleep when they sense the world taking a step of its own. I took one too. The head of the axe drank the thin firelight and did not shine. Steel this old prefers a matte truth. I breathed once, the way a man does before saying something that cannot be unsaid. The first stroke was not a sound but a verdict. Wood bedpost, door frame, the bones of the room. Might remember their language. The house flinched, I swear it did, as if timbers were tendons and a blow could travel through their body. He woke into the blow and tried to stand inside it, but judgment had already cut the sentence where it was meant to cut. The second stroke was a syllable to finish the first word. Then there was the hush that all real endings possess. Not quiet, but the air returning to itself after a wind that changed the field. I stood in the white ring of silence where a life had been ringing a long time. There was the old small business of blood, but I will not give it spectacle. It did not paint the night, as poets say. It simply agreed with gravity and memory. The cane did not reach the hand that wanted it. The dog slept the sleep of dogs. Outside, the yard took one more breath and placed it with the others. The house listened for a third stroke that did not come, knowing what enough is. That is a science too. I turned the axe so that steel looked at its own shadow, and learned nothing new. I wiped its mouth because that was the work a man does for a tool that has kept faith. Then I listened, and the listening said, "Walk the way a man who belongs here walks. Not fast, not proud." The floor accepted my departure like a clerk stamps a page and closes the book. On the porch, winter held out its bowl, and I gave it my breath. The stars had crept back up like curious neighbours. The lane went on being a vein that knew the way to the road. I put the axe back in the stump, blade asleep, handle upright like a spine that had told the truth and did not break for it. What does a county do when a pillar falls in the night? Morning wore a stunned look. The house learnt how to say widow before breakfast. The doctor came with his bag full of useless sentences. The sheriff stood in the room and placed his hat over the stain on the floor, as if hats were holy. Papers later would argue about words like assailant and coward, and fiend the way men set out labels like traps, and hope a fact was step. Neighbours arrived in their best shock. The porch collected hats, condolences, and eyes that could not quite hide relief at the vacancy in a chair that had always sat too straight. The dog looked for its master and learned the last lesson loyalty must learn. A boy ran to the quarters with a face the colour of a fresh page, and shouted what could not be shouted softly. In the quarters the air became a church. No one sang. The hymns were inside throats, private as the name a mother calls a child that the world cannot hear. Women went about the small sanctities, water to lips, balm to hands, bread shared. Men repaired a hinge that had been complaining all autumn because the world keeps needing its little work, even the day it changes its name. If anyone looked at the woodpile, they did not look long. Looking is a language white eyes had taught these yards to fear. Rumour made its rounds like a merchant with shiny goods and no conscience. One story bought another, a slave from across the river with a wildness in him, a stranger, a former hand come back for a justice there was no receipt for. Each tale wore a different hat, but the shoes were the same size. What no story did was count the ledger that had been adding itself without witness for years. A preacher spoke soft thunder at the funeral, the kind that makes a sound only the weather and widows respond to. He declared the world uncertain and the soul certain, and then returned certainty to his pocket. The coffin went to ground the way all furniture eventually does, the earth accepted without comment. The sheriff made his visits, asked his show questions, examined impossible footprints, measured the silence and found it exactly as long as the distance between a porch and a bed. He spoke to me because I was a hand that kept the woodpile honest. I looked at him with the gaze a log gives an axe, respect for a language no confession to an owner. He tapped his notebook and tried to hear words from wood. Wood held its counsel. The county decided. It always does. It decided the story would be kept under glass with other dangerous curiosities. It decided to spin a caution for some ears and a boast for others. It decided, as counties do, that the day before yesterday had been better than yesterday, and would remain so in the telling. Night returned and found the quarters humming the pitch of breath. A grandmother braided a child's hair and hid a prayer in the plait. A man tied a string around his wrist to remember something he could not afford to forget. The ledger under my skin did not close. It did not add either. It glowed the way coals glow when the fire appears to have told the whole story. Ears make legends the way a river makes its own bed, slow, insisting, indifferent to maps. The tale went walking, it borrowed coats as it travelled, the judge's grammar, the field hand's shrug, the widow's tremor, the child's summer dare. In one telling the axe leapt like lightning, in another the house itself swung. Some swore a hymn rose with the first blow sung by a mouth no one could find. Others said a wind went still, and that stillness itself did the work. Children tested the porch at dusk, tiptoeing to see which board confessed. Lovers went to the fence line to speak in codes where cedars keep conspiracies. Men who had always loved their reflection found new mirrors and rehearsed better faces. Women learnt to wear grief with a private stitch that held even when sleep tugged it. The dog slept lighter and woke with a question in its ribs. As for me, the world did not open and applaud, it did not close and swallow, it walked on in its old shoes and I with it. I stacked wood, I mended tools, I listened for a new grammar of cane tapping that never came again. In that absence other sounds learned to speak, the decent argument of rain on a tin roof, the reasoned voice a creek uses when it chooses the stones to carry, the calm consent a gate gives when opened by a hand that means to pass and not to own. If you ask which night the legend chooses to re-enter the county, I will say, the kind the moon wears like a thin coin between finger and thumb, kept, shown, kept again. If you stand by the stump where the axe rests, and you listen without trying to make sense, you will hear the old tongue of wood, not rage, not triumph, but the measured syllables of a world rearranging itself by one plank, And when winter comes, as it always does, window panes will repeat their pale scripture, the chimneys will murmur, the house will remember a flinch it tried to forget and adjust its bones. A boy will sit at a table and hear his mother's breath measure bread into portions that fall fairer than law. A man will pass the woodpile and put his palm against a handle polished by many hands, and learn that memory can be smooth. Is the story finished? The ledger says no, it sits open in a language the fields read with their backs, that the road reads with its two ditches, that the porch reads when no one is sitting. The last line is not written, the page waits without complaint, the way a stump waits for the axe to sit back down, blade turned inward, as if tools prefer reflection after speech. So the county lives in its old way, and the legend walks with it like a shadow that knows the names of the trees. On some nights the silence grows so thick you could stand a coin on it. On those nights a rumour rises that the house can be heard speaking to itself, timber to timber. Remember, and a man in the yard, whoever he is that year, will pause with an arm full of kindling and look at the porch as if someone had just called his secret name. What echoes stays. What speaks once and is true keeps speaking. The axe sleeps, the fields breathe, the dog dreams, a door takes a long time to shut itself, and somewhere in the unheated part of morning, where breath makes its small white vows and breaks them, a pair of footprints cross a yard without hurry, as if the world were a room that belongs to its quiet. The story does not end, it learns to stand very still so the smallest draught turns it into a candle. If you cup your hands you can feel the heat. If you listen you can hear the ledger turning a page with no fingers at all. If you look away the house will adjust its shoulders and pretend it never flinched. If you look back you will find the porch watching you, calm as grain in a board that remembers a forest you never walked. And if, on certain winter mornings, you hear something at the far end of the lane, the heavy syllable of truth, spoken once with a wooden mouth, do not tell anyone. Do not run, simply stand and learn the old language the county refuses to forget. It has only 3 words. You know them already, though you have never been taught aloud. Silence, ledger, judgment. The rest is breath on glass. The rest is winter insisting on its script. The rest is a house that cannot help but listen.